The slides that you're seeing are the ones that were presented at the HPA Tech Retreat in February of 2014, but the sound was recorded a little bit later. So, higher resolution, higher frame rate, and higher dynamic range in context. And by the way, you can get an expanded version of this on YouTube. Just search for UHD Bang, or you can go to Schubin Cafe and download the Bang for the Buck presentation in the Get the Download section. When we look at single camera 4K shooting, there's really only two things to be concerned about. One is the lens modulation transfer function, which is why there's no long-range zoom for a 4K camera yet. And then there's storage speed and capacity because of the high data rate related to 4K. And there are multiple benefits if you're using a 4K camera for HD output. You heard from Bob Seidel yesterday about the CBS use of 4K cameras in the Super Bowl in 2013. Fox Sports has also been using 4K cameras. Turner Sports has also been using 4K cameras. They're very useful when you're extracting HD out of that because you can reframe in post, you can do image stabilization in post, there's easier filtering because the camera is oversampling, you can even possibly do single sensor 3D as I'm showing at the bottom right here, and maybe even a little bit of increased sharpness because of the extra samples on the sensor. Now, the Tech Retreat has been dealing with 4K. I put HPA up here because it's a convenient way of describing the Tech Retreat, but even before HPA existed, the Tech Retreat was discussing 4K. We did it from the year 2000 to date, and maybe even a little bit earlier because we had some Department of Defense presentations where they didn't actually discuss the particular resolution, but we can imagine they were using some pretty high ones. For example, one of the earliest presentations on 4K we had was from Lockheed Martin, and that was a 3 CCD camera where each CCD had 12 megapixels, and that's clearly a true 4K camera. Some people argue that the Bayer pattern on some of the cameras that are called 4K cameras today reduces the resolution and therefore they're not necessarily 4K cameras. But we had the DALSA Origin, the Red 1, the ARRI D20 and 21, which were the precursors of the ARRI Alexa. They've all been described here at the HPA Tech Retreat or the Tech Retreat, and then we had a presentation when The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo came out, which was the first theatrical presentation that was 4K from end to end. And here's an image that was shown a long time ago at a Tech Retreat by, I think it was Hans Keening of ARRI, and it's showing what a viewer with 20/20 vision can see in a cinema. And notice that the green area up front, those viewers can see even 8K resolution and perceive that, and then way towards the back of the theater we have 4K resolution, and even in the very back row of the theater those viewers can perceive 3K resolution. And yet, if we look at the 2013 top box office movies, now the number one movie was shot on film, which of course we know is dead. The number two movie was shot on ARRI Alexa. Then numbers 3 and 4 were animated. Number 5 was shot on film, which again we know is dead. Number 6 was animated. Number 7, we get back to the ARRI Alexa. Now the ARRI Alexa has a usable resolution of 2880 by 1620, and 2880 is less than even 3K. So here is the same company that was showing us that people can see detail in a cinema that's way in beyond 3K, and their camera, which is less than 3K, is being used for these hot movies. Now, why is that? Well, it might have something to do with the fact that it's a high dynamic range camera. Nevertheless, people are talking about using 4K for other purposes. Here's a press release that came out this week, and next week, next Thursday, the National Theatre in London is going to be presenting its version of War Horse, and it's going to be sent out live, and at least one cinema is going to be getting it in 4K, and other cinemas will be getting some sort of down conversion from the 4K. Now, this was shown by the European Broadcasting Union at the Tech Retreat last year. These figures are based on a 56-inch screen, and they show two different distances from the screen. One is 2.7 meters, that's what we sometimes call the Lechner distance, or about 9 feet viewing distance, and the other is 1.5 times the picture height. Well, if you work out 1.5 times the picture height of a 56-inch screen, that works out to a little less than 3.5 feet. So very, very close viewing. And what they found was there is a perceptual improvement over HD for people who are watching 4K on a 56-inch screen. And if you watch it from the normal viewing distance, the Lechner distance, you get about 1/3 of a grade of improvement. And if you watch it really close from that less than 3.5 feet, then you get about 1/2 a grade of improvement. It's statistically significant, but it's a small improvement. Now, to get that improvement from either 720p 60 or 1080i 30, that would be 8 times the data rate, and if we choose even the 1/2 grade improvement, that would mean you have to go to 16 times the data rate to get a full grade of improvement. Now, this was shown by the EBU at the International Broadcasting Convention this past fall. And again, this is their viewer tests, and this time they're showing a full grade of improvement for a doubling of frame rate. If you go from 60 frames per second to 120, you get a full grade improvement. If you go from 120 to 240, you get a full grade of improvement. So that's only a doubling of the data rate to get a full grade of improvement versus 16 times the data rate to get a full grade of improvement by going from HD to 4K. Now, the source material, of course, matters, and here's some source material that the BBC has shown previously, a train moving. Notice that the tracks and the ties are equally sharp in both the upper and lower pictures, but the train itself is much sharper in the lower picture. And this is something that you can see from much greater viewing distances than the 4K viewing distances. But what about high dynamic range? Well, at the IBC convention, there was a debate called the Great Debate about whether we really need to go beyond HD, and one of the speakers at that debate made a statement that a 4K display delivers the best HD you've ever seen. And we've heard similar statements here at the retreat already. And yet, is it true? Well, I told the person who made that statement to go check out a comparison in the ARRI booth, and ARRI had side-by-side monitors where they were showing footage shot with their Alexa. One was a 4K display, and one was a high dynamic range HD display, and even the quoted person agreed that the high dynamic range HD display looked better than the 4K display. Now, why is that? Well, high dynamic range can actually increase picture detail because you can have reduced clipping, and consumer TVs already have more dynamic range than the reference monitors that we use. And also, contrast contributes to sharpness, so a higher dynamic range can increase sharpness just as higher resolution can, but higher resolution can sometimes result in reduced contrast. Now, at finer detail, you can see that higher dynamic range or increased contrast affects sharpness more. There are two schools of thought on these curves about what sharpness is proportional to. One is the RCA auto shade school of thought, which is that sharpness is proportional to the square of the area under the curve. And then there's a Zeiss school of thought, which is that sharpness is proportional to the area under the curve. But either way, you can see that if you lift up the curve, then you're adding much more sharpness than continuing that low trend out towards infinity. And if you go to true high dynamic range, where you're starting with tremendously more sharpness even at the low spatial frequencies, very low resolution, then you can see that that affects sharpness even more. Now, while we await high dynamic range viewer tests from the EBU, we have anecdotal evidence, and I am one of the people who can offer anecdotal evidence, and I have viewed a bunch of high dynamic range stuff. You can do it in the demo room here, and it's pretty spectacular, I have to admit. It has an enormous impact on the viewer. Now, what does it do to data rate? Well, theoretically nothing, because bit depth simply determines signal-to-noise ratio when at least 1/2 of the least significant bit is noise. But practically, people don't observe that 1/2 LSB noise criterion, and so it causes contouring. As you see on the right here, this is supposed to be a smooth ramp from black at the top to white at the bottom, and instead you see steps. And the contouring is halved per bit, and it's eliminated when you get to the point again where 1/2 of the least significant bit matches or is less than the noise. So, let's say you had to go to 12 bits over 10 bits. Well, that would be a 0.2 times increase in the data rate. And again, we don't have any EBU viewer data yet, but let's say that it's only half a grade of improvement, and my anecdotal feeling is it's considerably more than that. But if it was only half a grade of improvement, then we have only a 40% increase in data rate per grade of improvement. That's far better than even higher frame rate, and unbelievably better than going to 4K. And here's something that appeared in the SMPTE Motion Imaging Journal in the November-December issue of last year. It's in the message from the executive director, Barbara Lang, who's here at the show, was talking about what happened at the SMPTE conference, and people were asked whether more pixels, going to 4K is better, or faster pixels is better, which would be higher frame rate, or better pixels, for example, higher dynamic range, is better. And these are her words. The overwhelming response from attendees was that faster and better pixels are more desirable than more pixels.